Hello and welcome to the Surgical Spirit podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Haidar Al-Hakim, the Third Eye Doctor. Pull up a chair and get ready for some candid and uncompromising discussion with experts, innovators, agitators, and influential people from every corner of health and well-being. From inside the hospital to at home in the kitchen, we're leaving no stone unturned in our quest to uncover the secrets of healthier, happier, more successful, and less stressful lives. Thank you so much for joining us, and without further ado, let's meet this episode's guest. Hello, this is Dr. Haidar Al-Hakim, the Third Eye Doctor. Thank you for listening today to the Surgical Spirit podcast. And hello, Gabby. How are you doing, Gabby?
I'm good, thanks. And how are you?
I'm well. It's a bit hot here, I must say. It's a bit of a paradox coming from an Iraqi talking about heat here in the UK, which barely hits 30. But hey, I guess we change our skin, don't we? Sort of leopards do change their skins.
That's exactly right. It's a bit odd hearing anyone in London saying it's hot, to be honest.
Yeah, we've had an amazing heat wave here, and I was reading an article by a friend of mine. He has a doctorate in geopolitics and economics, and he talks about how the changing climate is real, and it's due to changes in our civilization rather than anything else. That civilization has changed, and that since the industrial era, the Earth has heated up by 1 degree.
1 degree.
Only 1 degree.
I was going to say, is that significant? I wouldn't have thought that was significant.
Well, it's apparently super significant, and
really?
yeah, and the sort of catastrophic changes on Earth would happen. That means no one would live on this Earth if it reaches up to 8 degrees above. Well, actually 7 degrees now, because we've gone up by 1 degree. So, and he talks about how there's going to be a crisis of civilization. I mean, his views are quite extreme and a bit depressing. But he has written some amazing books. One on 7/7, the 7/7 terrorist attack in London.
Oh yeah.
And he's an amazing investigative journalist. So he's got some real gems of knowledge, and he wrote a book on the 9/11 attacks, and he was summoned by the US Congress to give a statement and for them to pick his brains. Dr. Ahmed, Nafiz Ahmed, his name is, from Bangladeshi descent, origin. Cool. So, really interested about your journey into management and into leadership and into coaching. When did that all start?
I suppose it really started when I was working in the corporate space. So I actually graduated uni with qualifications in accounting, and so went into the corporate world as an accountant. And for many years did accounting, ended up as a financial controller. But what was really fascinating for me, I guess, always having been someone who was fascinated in life and people, was even from when I graduated and I was in an organisation, I was always just fascinated at people, and I got this almost unhealthy obsession really with management and with decision making and with just how different people are when they kind of walk through that corporate door. So it was really just quite an interesting journey. I went on to financial controller and executive levels in finance and was always very successful. Yet with that success came a lot of conflict with those around me, especially the peers. And, it's only with hindsight you can look at what was going on. And I think, for me, one of the things was it was always a journey about how do you stay being yourself, how do you stay centered, how do you stay real. So I always had a way of working with my team that was real, and it was about supporting them and developing them. And eventually that skill or that focus was recognised by the consulting industry, and I was headhunted into a software company, and then ultimately another big company, where my role really became one initially of building bridges between different companies and different skills. So with the IT company, my role was basically to build a bridge between the techies who are building software and the companies who were wanting software, so we could get greater success. Because inevitably they just, were talking different languages, and also there's lots of politics that goes on in organisations that, drives different results. So I then spent a lot of time working with lots of companies in that space of sort of being that go-between person. And again, observing fascinating behaviours,
Wow.
Employees and managers and all those sorts of things. But I went on and did roles as a project manager, project director, really started specialising in troubleshooting failing projects. And again, I think it was because I could just put a different lens on things that were happening. But through all of that, again, a big part of my focus was always, how do you bring people on that journey with you? How do you really, develop people? How do you build great team environments to get outcomes that you need, whether you're in, disastrous emergency situations, or just normal day-to-day work situations. So I was kind of fortunate that in those consulting roles and project management roles that I worked with probably hundreds of companies and clients, and you just get to see over and over again different dynamics. And I think what became one of my real sort of turning points in this was that the older I got and the more companies I worked with, I just kept seeing the same thing. And I guess I was always just became more and more fascinated. And I don't think a lot of being a great manager or leader is rocket science, yet there is something about it that clearly is rocket science.
Yeah, okay.
So eventually in 2000, I actually left the corporate world after doing a pretty major project where we had to build and sell a company, which brought with it lots of amazing people challenges again. But when I left the corporate world, I decided that what I really wanted to do was to take all of that now and work with, managers from really entrepreneurs all the way through to multinationals, in really working at how do we create better team environments, how do we create better outcomes. So just really working in that space with organisations. And for me, the journey became about how do I continue to, I guess, lead my life and my professional career in a way that I just keep enjoying what I'm doing and working in the space that I enjoy and really feel like I can contribute to and make a difference. And every time I try and veer out of the leadership and management space, something brings me back into it. It's just something that I'm really drawn to. I'm passionate about it. I think one of the biggest ways we can make a difference in the world at the moment is in how we run organisations. And I think the quality on average of leadership and management education is quite appalling, and a lot of it is stuck still in the Industrial Revolution.
Wow, it's sort of that old.
Yeah, well, a lot of our management theory today actually came out of the Industrial Revolution. Wow. So it is quite interesting when you start tracking it back, and a lot of those things we're still using today. They're the basis of what's taught in management.
Could you give examples of that?
Yeah, sure. So if you think about it, what happened in the Industrial Revolution was that before that, everything was kind of done in villages, and you had more of an agricultural society, and smaller villages. The Industrial Revolution all of a sudden brought with it an environment where you were employing lots of people, and they were doing work such as, factory work or mining, those sorts of things. So all of a sudden, their managers, if you like, who would have been before running, a farm or a market or something like that, were now bought into these businesses to create outcomes for business people. And the Industrial Revolution was the first time that we saw people owning companies who weren't running at the companies, if you like.
Right.
Whereas before that, it was all the same. So we have this scenario where you now had a manager coming in to run a company, but it wasn't their company, and they had to deliver results for this person out here who was basically an investor and, wanted their return on their investment. So this is where things started coming together, such as, the concept of KPIs, of performance, of how many widgets needed to be, produced from a factory line, of the concept of hierarchies. When we talk about organisational hierarchies, the original hierarchy had a foreman who was sitting on a production line, observing the products as they went through. So this is where the original concept of hierarchy still came straight out of the Industrial Revolution. All of the body of knowledge to do sort of with KPIs, with generating results, still has a lot of that Industrial Revolution and factory-based widget level thinking in it. So what actually happened is, as more and more of businesses were run, eventually management theory was developed, but it was developed by looking back at the Industrial Revolution and what happened, because when the Industrial Revolution kicked off, there was no body of knowledge called management.
Yeah.
So it was only by looking back at the Industrial Revolution of management theory and management history, like Taylorism, where they developed this body of knowledge by looking back at what happened in the Industrial Revolution, but it was all focused about producing outputs.
Yeah.
It was about productivity. It was about efficiency. It was about return on the level of investment and infrastructure that was in place. And that there's never been, at the moment, a time in history, if you like, where that body of knowledge has ever been revised per se.
Right.
Because it all came out from there. So if you were really going to revise the body of knowledge of management, you sort of would have to go, I'm going to put that on a shelf over there, and let's really brainstorm and think about what are organisations today, what does it mean, to run an organisation. So that body of knowledge sat there. What you'll see if you look at history is then the body of knowledge about leadership came out. So what actually happened is, as people were basically being burnt out, as they still are today in organisations, psychology sort of started getting involved, and like one of the first things we saw was Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where he started understanding that it's not just about the widgets and the manufacturing, but there are people involved here. And we need to treat them as people, and different people are motivated differently. So we sort of had management theory sitting over here. Now we had psychology and what ultimately became leadership theory coming in next to management. So anything to do with leadership basically became about dealing with people. It became about you as a leader. It became about teams. That sort of sat here. But the body of knowledge of management, about command, control, production, return on investment, achieving outcomes, sat quite separately to it. Even today, if you look at anything people write in your basic management education, there will still be a line drawn between management and leadership. The two different concepts, and that all the different bits of leadership are to do with people, and all the sort of generally thought of body of knowledge of management is to do with that, just achieving results. So and so there's a lot more to that with, lots of different theories and things, different pieces of knowledge within that. But so, yeah, the work we've done today, that body of knowledge of management, is still a direct line from the Industrial Revolution. We now talk about leadership. We have all these fads coming in leadership and people management, but we're failing to put the two together to create a new body of knowledge.
Okay.
So
we haven't got there yet, or are we in the process of working towards it, generally speaking?
I'm not seeing a lot of it because we're still, you'll find that 80% of teaching out there still separates leadership from management. Now what's actually happened is there's a much greater emphasis on leadership education than management education, which is, all about you, how you show up, and about teams. But now what we've got is a divide. We're either talking about you and leadership and people, or we're talking about management and KPIs and efficiencies and, the stripping of resources to get a return. Whereas, if you asked me, what does a new body of knowledge look like? I'd say we can no longer separate leadership from management. If you're stepping into a role to manage any aspect of an organisation, the only way you achieve outcomes is through people. So we need to bring these two bodies of knowledge together. So as someone running an aspect of an organisation, you should not only learn about what it means to maximise the energy of a team towards outcomes, you should be learning about what is a business, what outcomes need to be achieved to make business sustainable, and then revise, if you like, that whole integration so that we stop what we've got, which is really still very, in most organisations, something that says the longer you work, the more you're respected. We're still churning out the, shareholder return. We are trying to, strip mine, if you like, our human resources in order to produce financial returns. And we separate like this business knowledge over here, management and leadership. So for me, it is about integrating those all back into one space and doing very integrated management / leadership education. I'd love to find another word that wasn't management or leadership, I
mean, the word that sort of came to my mind is coaching. Can coaching bring the two together?
Coaching can bring the two together in that if we look at really what is a very current and future-oriented management skill, it is without doubt the skill of coaching. The only thing that I would say that needs to be brought into that, though, is a level of awareness around business acumen. Because if we're going to create great work environments and sustainable organisations, we have to understand what that means at a business level. So if you're just coaching someone to build up their knowledge of, people and how to create a great team environment, that's fabulous. But you couldn't send a company broke in doing that. So how do we integrate the two so that we get a much more balanced approach between the two? That we do create, energised and engaging organisations that also achieve great results, but not results that strip mine our human resources. And the other way around, where we get this incredibly entitled workforce, who thinks that organisations owe them a living. So, there needs to be this balance. And I just think without that level of integration of knowledge, we're never going to take the quantum leap that we need to take in order to really get organisations to that next level.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, training as a doctor, I think I barely got any training whatsoever in business whatsoever in the whole of medical school. I mean, I learnt some business in high school, but the rest is all self-taught, and I think it would be. I mean, the question is, can doctors be business owners and runners? Is is it in keeping with the altruistic and the people pleasing or people loving personality? Does it go hand in hand?
Well, I think it can go hand in hand, and in fact, I think the world would be a better place if it went hand in hand better, because I certainly know, from a lot of the organisations I've worked with in the health area that, a lot of them are so focused just on the bottom line because they are owned by external investors and or businessmen or women, or, for that matter, the government or their public companies, that the focus, that business management, if you like, is happening by someone else who doesn't have those qualities. So maybe if we could create a breed of entrepreneurial doctors, or medical professionals who were taught more about business and management, that we can create organisations that don't just have a good financial outcome, they have a great human outcome as well. And within that, I think the quality of caring, the quality of what's important to them in life, could well open some different models as to even what do the financials look like in that? What does a good return mean? How can you make money and provide affordable healthcare? That takes really a lot of people with a lot of passion and intelligence and business acumen to throw around ideas until, that next level of thought.
I mean, it sounds really exciting, and it sounds something that a lot of people will be really, really interested to take forward. I think, having that, as you said, that leadership spirit, the business acumen and knowledge, and sort of integrating the whole thing. It takes more people to sort of talk about this, and as you said, to discuss it a lot more. I mean, do you think this is happening at the moment, or is it still in the infancy stage?
If you're talking specifically in the medical field, and health, I don't know that I've seen a lot of at all. There's a lot of education out there hammering entrepreneurs, but they're really more the business focused entrepreneurs, not with necessarily within a specific industry. So I don't see anything that sort of says, here's a program, let's get a bunch of doctors or medical professionals together and let's learn as an industry about business acumen, about management, about leadership, and let's start creating some of our own models and concepts.
There is a group in the UK called Doctorpreneurs, and
nice.
So there's a group. They've been around for over 5 years. I went to one of their events about 3 years ago, and I think celebrating business, I think that's something that doctors had difficulty in acknowledging. Even the entrepreneurs there, who are all doctors, investors, and angel investors, and sort of all the latest buzzwords that they use to describe themselves, there is still that kind of yes, they feel a bit reluctant or ashamed to sort of admit that they love business. And I think if more doctors were exposed to business, the process of business, the naming or the nomenclature of business, and just bring them together and saying that actually it can work together. They're not mutually exclusive. They're not one against the other. And the more that we can bring them together, the more likely we are to have a new system, because we know that the current system in the NHS and sort of the rest of the developed world health system is a broken system. Because it celebrates more to one side than the other, whichever one is winning. And it's that balance between rights and responsibilities and it sort of shifts more to one side than the other. Whereas sort of finding, I mean, I'm not a fan of balance. I've said that to many people. You know, I don't think you can find balance, but you can find what I call a physiological wave. And so you go up and down, but within function and within a sort of a productive existence. And that's where people come in, dealing with people in teams, and that's where the actual landscape of where you're working in helps as well, which is in terms of business. But I'm just interested. So a person who's interested in people and yet does accounting. I mean, how does that work?
Well, I think that's the beauty of my background in finance has been that as I've moved more and more into the field of management and leadership and, you know, working in that space, that you realise that that basic understanding of finance and business adds a lot of value to how you work with teams of managers, and it's obviously really obvious for me because of my background, but I reckon 80% of managers wouldn't know how to read a financial statement, a balance sheet or a profit and loss. Lots of them, you know, hardly even do budgets. And it's not that it's about that, but it is about acknowledging that if you are in a business, if you walk through a door that is a business, at the end of the day, there are a set of financials that have to underpin and fund and run, make money to survive. So I think you owe it to learn about, you know, at least the basics of finance and accounting if you want to call yourself a manager. Now, I know, you know, I get a lot of flack about those sorts of opinions, but I just think if you are in there, you know, running teams and spending organisational resources, you know, that you owe it to yourself and to the business to understand it. So for me, it's actually been a really accidental and powerful and useful piece of the integration of, you know, everything that I do. I don't practice as an accountant anymore. I have an accountant, but obviously that knowledge just continues to be incredibly valuable every day, and every program I do, you know, it's just such a valuable, you know, base set of knowledge.
And, you know, with the current problems that we have in terms of doctors burning out and sort of the lack of well-being amongst a lot of doctors, do you think that would help them in learning about the organisation, the business side of things, where they fit in? Or is it something that's more of a deeper problem?
Yeah, I think that problem can be dissected on many levels. I think if you want to talk about just that as a potential aspect, you know, or component of it, I suppose I've got a couple of views on it from a few different perspectives. One is I did some work a few years ago with one of the government health bodies here in Australia, and the program was a program for clinicians, and it was a clinicians business development program. And as part of it, what we did was we taught several cohorts of senior clinicians about business. We, including educating them on the incredible complex set of accounting and finance processes and funding used by the government. Incredibly complex. But the intention wasn't that they became experts at the funding. The intention was that in being aware of it, they could put a different lens on how they were being managed and why they were being driven to do certain things. Doesn't justify it by any means as far as whether the system of funding is good, bad or otherwise. But once you understand it, you are more empowered to make decisions and push back at a management or, you know, executive or board level to put forward different proposals. Because you have a better level of understanding, you know, about what's going on. And I have to admit that that program and that education did make a lot of difference to those clinicians in how empowered they felt. to the changes that they made within their divisions, their departments, their wards, to improve it for both patients and for the employees. So I think that is a very positive aspect of that, just from a kind of a psyche perspective.
But how early do we go? I mean, is it just senior clinicians, or do you think medical students and junior doctors should be involved in that process as well?
I think, I suppose, because doctors have, I guess, such a choice of careers, you can go into the public system or a private system. Actually, I just want to track this back a bit and say something first. I think, first of all, from what I'm aware of, the education of doctors and the way that education is carried out is so full on and so demanding and everything else that the way it is currently structured, I do not think there is the time or that anyone would have the headspace to learn about business at the same time as learning about becoming a doctor. So I think that first needs to be put on the table, that even if it's a good idea, there would need to be radical and systemic change as to how we educate doctors, because we at the moment we could not put anything else on them. That would be just shocking. However, given if there was an ability to do that and create sufficient headspace and a stream within that education process that possibly did teach them some basics, even if it was the basics of maybe at the time how the public health system is funded, because it will give them a different lens to understand why they're being asked to do things, why you're triaging patients and only focusing on some for a certain time, why there might be pressure to get patients out of a hospital and look at in-home care because of what it does, to the financials of a hospital. With that lens, they may find it easier to exist within that system, knowing why some of those decisions are made, and therefore may not take on the personal burden that goes with being a professional where you predominantly care about people and you want to spend the time with them that you feel you need to, to create the best outcome possible. But behind you, you've got a set of executive and managers, making what appear to be random and very selfish decisions. So with that lens, you may not take it so personally, so maybe it won't take such an emotional toll on you. But secondly, you may be able to look at what you're doing through a different lens and suggest improvements to those management that maybe they don't think of, because I know a lot of them aren't necessarily, clinicians or doctors, a lot of the executive in a lot of cases. But, it could well equip them to better make a difference to the system if they understood more about how it was run. But I'd be so reluctant to put any more pressure on them as far as...
It is very heavy. It is very heavy, but, the knowledge has changed now, dissemination of knowledge has changed now. The way people process knowledge is totally different, so I think there does need to be a radical change, a continuous radical change in terms of medical education for sure. It's interesting. I mean, in terms of more junior doctors involved in management, I think it's essential, because managers do want to know what's going on the front line, do want to know what the troops are doing and sort of what's happening there, because there are many things that senior doctors do not realise and do not see happening on the front line. And it's like in any business, isn't it? You do want the input from the customer assistant and the person that's taking the calls.
Yeah, very much so. And like I found it quite fascinating when we were working with these senior clinicians, the value they added to that organisation. You know, the program went over 3 months, and they actually had to identify a business improvement project as a result of the knowledge they gained on the program, and it was monumental, the improvements that were made, you know, to the organisation as a result simply of that, a level of knowledge that they normally wouldn't have had. And because they learned how to speak that language too, if you like, that language of business, they were much better able to put forward ideas that a lot of them have been trying to put up for ages, but they just weren't using the right language.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? It's sort of language, because once you speak to a manager in their language, it's sort of they sort of sit up and think, well, actually, this guy or this girl knows exactly what they're talking about, and you can nail it. Time is the issue, of course. But then I'm sure new roles will be created. You know, where previously doctors used to do those roles, there'll be a lot more technicians doing it instead, and it's marrying it all together. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, the role of management in the NHS, that's a big one. And have you worked with the NHS before?
I haven't worked with the NHS, but with the system over here, we have taken a lot from the NHS. So I was on those programs with Health Here. We actually had some presenters from the NHS who were presenting on, you know, what had been going on over there.
What do you think of them as managers?
I suppose I couldn't comment on them personally as managers because I never worked for them. My observation of what we were looking at from the NHS, which was a lot to do with the changes in how hospitals were funded and, you know, those sorts of things. I just found it, I mean, I've got an accounting background and I found it incredibly complex. And it could well be very smart, but I just got the feeling that sometimes I think we just try to get too complex and too clever. And you know, as we break things down more and more and make them more complex, are we really adding value to the system? Does it really make that much difference? So what I found was, I guess, a lot of intelligent people sharing a lot of information and data and different ways of analysing that data to fund activity in hospitals. So, yeah, for me, that's what it was. It was a lot of data, a lot of what seemed to be a lot of intelligent debate, a lot of complexity. So have I actually worked as managers? I don't know, but that's sort of the aspect of it that I got to see.
Yep. And is it sort of similar to sort of big corporations? It gets very complicated and.
Look, big corporate accounting is complex, but to be honest, I don't think it's anywhere near as complex as the sort of funding arrangements within some of the public hospital system. I mean, the activity-based funding and everything is, incredibly complex. And I'd say more than your standard corporate.
Now, the thing that comes to my mind always working for a corporate is that you kind of lose your true identity. How true was that for you when you're working in the corporate sector?
Well, it was actually incredibly true. But the interesting thing here is I didn't realise it was happening. I can say this now because obviously I've observed it at quite a different level, but as I stayed in the corporate world, I really did become it, including, but not being aware of how much you are in there playing the politics, including not even realising how stressed you are and how burnt out you are, because it happens so gradually over time that it's the norm. It's just normal. And it wasn't actually until I'd finished that last major project of building that company when I decided to take 3 months off. At the end of 3 months, I felt so different to when I walked out 3 months ago. So different, in fact, it genuinely scared me, and I really was beginning to enjoy who I was again and got back, to the essence of me. And then the more I observed that corporate world and the people I, of course, knew who were still in it, which was, most of the people, I had worked with and lots of close friends in that space. Once you're out of it, it's very easy to observe. And that was really a big catalyst for me of saying, well, from now on, I am going to look at working with people and organisations and teams to see how we can really improve management, leadership and organisational outcomes. And I never went back into the corporate world. And that was never the intention when I took the break.
Yeah.
But
I mean, you took the break because you needed the break out of doing all that work. Yeah.
So, yeah, you do get lost in it. And I think the scary thing is that you don't realise you do, and that the long hours, the stress, the politics becomes the norm. So your benchmarks are all lost because everyone's going down the same rabbit hole.
Yeah. Some people are not as lucky as you. It's sort of, they keep going until something breaks and shatters and they're left with nothing. There's no more pieces to pick up anymore. Yes.
I can understand that, because you don't even, at some level, I don't believe you even know you're doing it.
Yeah.
It really just does become you. And because your benchmarks are around you and they are no different, you don't even have that kind of glaring in your face. What are you doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I've lost my train of thought, but I wanted to speak to you. Well, can't remember now. Something about people. Anyway, so coaching is an interesting thing. Coaching is sort of becoming a bit of a buzzword at the moment. And before going to coaching, I wanted to ask you about. You said there are sort of a lot of similarities of good teams and sort of bad teams that keep popping up, and it becomes quite common. So could you give us examples of what makes good teams and what examples of what makes bad teams?
So I guess it's easiest to start with if you're often when you're asked to do work with companies, it kind of all starts from the same point, and it generally is, my team's not performing, or my team, needs to perform better. And inevitably what you're looking at is politics. You're looking at not achieving good results, for the organisation. You're looking at a general kind of lack of engagement, lack of rapport, poor culture, a lot of toxic cultures, where management and staff are just at loggerheads. Teams that aren't cohesive. But the sad commonality within all of this, when I look at it, is that when I look at a poor performing team, my first protocol is not really to want to go in and address the poor performers within the team. Management and leadership have a massive impact on organisations and culture and the energy of an organisation. So for me, I tend to go in and ask lots of questions, but start with what is happening from a management perspective around the team. And then once we know we've got good kind of systems and processes and a manager who's functioning well, then we can really start looking at, where are the bad eggs and how do we deal with them? Because you can go in and go, let's do some team building and let's fix the team. But if the environment around that team isn't sound, then it's never going to be sustainable. So, looking at sitting down and looking at the team environment, is there a vision for the team? Do they know where they're headed? Um, how are they clear on what their roles are, where they fit in to the organisation, how their role contributes to the organisation? Has the manager got good processes in place where they're regularly sitting down with their team members and having a conversation about how the week's gone, what's been achieved, what hasn't, what could be improved, rather than this concept of let's do performance management every 12 months. No, you should be doing it, every day, every week. And this is where that concept of coaching really comes in, because I think the concept of performance management is such an old one. We need to replace it with something which is much more great conversations, great questions, sitting down regularly. So one of the big problems really with team environments is actually our management capability and skills in to how to really take a group of people and have them energized and engaged in the pursuit of goals and outcomes. But if we go back to the previous conversation, I believe part of the reason we have so many issues with management and managers is because our management education isn't integrated. So you might go off and do a leadership course, and you might study Gandhi and talk about presence and charisma and authentic leadership, and that's fabulous, to have a vision. But it's not enough in an organisational context just to be a leader and have a vision. You've got to have the management skills that then translate that into really how you drive a team to achieve results, how you do give feedback, how you are contributing to the business environment, to the vision of the organisation, the strategies and the goals of the organisation. So the commonality is the observation of, poor performing teams, people who really aren't motivated or engaged, either too much conflict or not enough conflict in a team, as in most of the time what you'll find is team members will just say yes because there's no point giving feedback to management. So you end up with this really sort of bad culture going on, in teams. But as I say, I think you've got to take a step back from that first and really look at the skills and capabilities of the managers and support them in creating a really nice integrated skill set so that they can really contribute to creating a great team, and then cascade that down and start working with the team, and you can do some, great stuff to do with teamwork and teaching a whole lot of different skills at the team level.
So something that popped into my head just now is sort of job swapping. Managers swapping jobs with doctors and sort of looking at their roles and the way that they do their job, and doctors swapping with managers, and it's sort of encapsulating their work experience and the way that they deal with their work life and managing people. And as you said, it's sort of essentially understanding and more knowledge and understanding and just being aware that there are these different roles, and sometimes we've got to encapsulate those other roles within us to be better workers within an organisation. What got you started in coaching? Because you sort of you do a lot of coaching now. What was the sort of starting point for that?
So for me, the coaching actually came out of the education and training side of things, in that if I'm working with you, it's one thing for you to do a day's training, or to do a course, but inevitably skills transfer and development has to happen over time. So coaching is really a kind of an essential skill that helps with skills transfer by continuing to connect, to look at, how are you going, where have your challenges been, what's working, what's not, taking the next step, and then, continuing along that journey. So it started very much from the space of L&D and skills transfer. And then the more work that I did within the coaching space, the more relevant you realise that skill and that capability is with everything. As I say, it's the core of really management. I think if we taught more managers the skills of coaching, we could really transform how we do performance management and how we get better teams and better communication, within our teams. And then from there, purely because of the work I was doing, I got involved with a lot of life coaches, health coaches, every other sort of coaches, and the more you realise that it's just such a universal skill, and I think it's one of the skills we should be teaching anyone who steps up into any sort of supervisory or management capability. Also with psychologists actually recently who are using much more of a coaching approach too, when they work with some of their clients. So that's quite interesting.
And sort of in your view, Gabby, what makes a good coach?
I think well, the first thing is it depends on which field the coach is in, makes a difference as to what makes a good coach. So if you were looking at someone, say, in the life coaching field, then for me personally, and a lot of people wouldn't agree with this, I would prefer to see someone who's probably older with more experience and, is a very good listener and is very good at the art of coaching, the art of really asking fabulous questions and getting below the skin, to take someone forward. If you're looking at coaches in specific areas, so let's say with a lot of the stuff I do, executive coaching, management coaching, leadership coaching, then you want someone who, I believe, has experience in that space and has a wealth of knowledge in that space. Because I believe where you're doing coaching with a subject context, you are probably much more looking at a model which isn't pure coaching. It's a bit of coaching, it's a bit of mentoring, it's a bit of education. Whereas life coaching can be more that pure coaching. So if you are, looking at engaging an executive coach, a management coach, a business coach, a health coach, a wellness coach, I think you would want someone who has got some good skill and experience in that space, as well as the knowledge, of coaching.
And who's the best coach that you've had?
Who's the best coach that I've had? For me, it's probably been one of my my managers, actually, when I was in the corporate space very, very early on. I didn't know it at the time that's what he was doing.
Right.
It's interesting. I only realised that in hindsight. And they say that all the latest research says that when you look at through your career, most people are lucky to say that they've had one manager, at the most two, who has really made a massive impact on their life. And for me, I've had one, and it was him. But now I realise why.
Why was he a good coach?
Because he very much took that coaching approach. He made me own what I was doing. He challenged my decisions. He didn't tell me what to do or direct me, but he challenged, he questioned, he made me be the best version of me I could be, because he didn't let me settle for taking the easy road or always just saying yes. So
having that good challenge, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I remember my my first life coach. I won't mention his name here, but it was tough. I didn't like it because I was constantly being, questioned, and rarely have I, been questioned that much by another person. It was really annoying, actually. I was really annoyed. You know,
Well,
but
that's
looking
exciting.
back, but looking back, it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me in my life, and I say that now because, you know, the self-confidence, the self-esteem, just looking within and looking at all the dark as well as the light areas in, you know, within you, just
Yeah.
makes you much more aware of who you truly are. And, you know, being in a system where, you know, you have to fit into this box and that's all you've got, you know, you sort of just get complacent and, well, you get burnt out, don't you?
Yeah. But that's exactly right. You know, that person who's asking those tough questions and getting you to look in spaces you wouldn't look in naturally yourself, you know, and that they've got the confidence to hold that space for you to do that, I think is incredibly powerful.
Mm. Mm.
Um, you know, and yeah, there should be more of it. I mean, it's interesting, you know, when you look at the what is happening at the moment, you know, with doctors and I think physicians in general globally. I mean, I've been staggered at the statistics around things such as suicides of doctors
Mm.
and the mental health and around the world.
Mm.
You know, I thought it was isolated, but it's not. It's Australia, it's the US, it's the UK. It's appalling. And you know, there are so many contributing factors to it, but you know, it could be an interesting um, experiment to see what would happen if you took a bunch of doctors and for their life as a doctor they had a life coach
Mm.
appointed to them.
Mm.
You know, could that break some of the systemic thinking,
Mm.
build them up better internally? You know, they've also got someone to speak to. It
Mm.
would be an interesting experiment to try.
Well, I mean, it changed my
That's,
life totally.
mm,
It really did. It sort of shook me to the core, and, you know, I even changed my beliefs and
right.
all these other cultural things,
Yeah.
and that had massive consequences for me, you know, in terms of my
Mm,
relationship, my ethnic community, my siblings as well, and it was a very, very difficult time for me. And but, you know, in hindsight, it was still the best thing I ever did.
mm.
And yes, I mean, you read my mind because I was going to ask you, you know, do you think coaching and life coaching has a role in today's doctor? And you sort of pretty much answered that question, an astounding yes. And I gather you're working with an American medical school about this.
Yeah, that's right. It's um, you know, it's just fabulous to see that there is a medical school. This one being the Boston School of Medicine, and for their interns, they actually appoint coaches for their interns. And the coaching is a balance across their skill development.
Mm.
So it is about their capability development. It's about supporting them through their exams, through their residency, through, you know, building the relationships they need to, through observing themselves, as well as the reflection on themselves and their lives
Mm.
to try and help keep everything in balance because of obviously the issues that we know that exist there, you know, with interns.
Mm.
In general, as far as the pressure and the long hours and the lack of sleep,
Mm.
and you know, it's just so much on them. So, you know, I think that's a fabulous initiative, and it would be, yeah, really interesting to see that concept, be it with interns or, but even more as doctors go out into the world, you know, to have coaches available to them. I was reading, I don't know if it's true over there, but I was reading something recently that here in Australia there's mandatory reporting laws, and that so if a doctor actually goes and discusses, I assume it's with a licensed professional such as
Mm.
a psychologist, if that psychologist thinks that the doctor, may have issues in performing their duties and or be detrimental to the public, then they have mandatory reporting, which is fabulous. I can understand why that is. But what an incredible deterrent for doctors to seek support. We have such systemic issues around this as far as supporting, our doctors and our clinical professionals. A coach, might be an option to fill a space where they've, it really does can, really add value, that they can go to safely, that they can see consistently. There's a big mining company here in Australia who just tried a experiment, a pilot, and what they did was they simply made life coaches, or coaches in general, available to any of their staff should they choose to honour. All they had to do was put up their hand. So they typically had what is called an EAS, or an employee assistance scheme, where you have access to counsellors and all that sort of thing. But they decided that's all very reactive. So what if they added to their employee assistance scheme the opportunity for their staff to work with a coach? And I thought, what a fabulous initiative. I was involved in helping pull together those coaches for that. But what a fabulous initiative. Yeah. And they had incredible take-up, from the staff for that, and some fabulous feedback. And, there, whilst it's not the medical profession, the equivalent were managers and others who took up this service, who were really challenged with their careers, with politics, with toxic cultures, but they couldn't talk to anyone about it. So by being able to engage a coach was a fabulous way for them to develop new skill sets, new resilience skills, look at their life.
I mean, it would be met with initial resistance for sure, and, a lot of disillusionment. But in the long term, it would benefit them. Definitely. It was interesting. I was speaking to a GP partner up in North England, and they've employed life coaches for their patients.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So they've got about, he said, 60 life coaches for their. I think they've got 8,000 patients on their practice list, and he said that 80% of our usual attendees that come, for appointments, don't come anymore. Because they're seeing the life coaches, they're talking about their financial problems, they're talking about their relationship problems, they're talking about and sort of dealing with sort of, let's say, the life psychological problems that they go through. They would have otherwise seen their GP for usual ailments, blood pressure, what have you. And now it's sort of, it's freed up 80% of their sort of usual slots, and they're sort of seeing the more serious stuff. So, things are going in the right direction, slowly, I'm sure. But certainly medical schools, that's something that can be looked into. And I know that you're a founder of sort of a digital platform for coaching. That's quite interesting as well.
Yes. So the reason for that was that typically in a coaching engagement, you're speaking to a coach once a month would be pretty typical. But what's happening is you can spend a lot of that time then in that one session in finding out sort of what's gone on since the last session, how you're going with your goals, all that sort of stuff. So the purpose behind it, I guess, was to leverage the sorts of things we're doing as a result of social media, which is we're messaging each other. We're actually building really strong relationships with people based on messages. So if I met you and then I didn't meet you again for 3 months, we wouldn't have built much of a connection. But if I meet you, we catch up on Facebook, we send a few messages, you see a few updates, we actually build quite a strong relationship. And our whole kind of psyche is changing to this. So, we're building incredibly strong relationships, sometimes just online. So the idea was, what if we could take that and bring it into the coaching relationship to add even more value to the coaching relationship, to create that stronger bond and engagement between the coach and the client, but also a means to better track, the goals and the sorts of things that we're working on. So we basically built a platform that integrates in things like instant messaging, where you would normally keep a book journal and you'd write notes, you do your journals in it. You can share those reflections directly with your coach. So you can write in your journal. You don't have to share it, but you can if you want. And direct messaging, so you can do instant messaging and other things, like the concept of the life wheel is in there. So you can check in on your wheel, and every time you check in as your coach, I'll see that. So I'll see your check-ins. So, but the general idea is that as you do that between coaching sessions, what you're actually doing is you're sharing some really rich data with the coach. But the coach can make sure that you are doing regular reflection, and you are taking some action towards your goals if you've had some. But it doesn't take up a lot of the coach's time, because you're sitting down having a coffee, so you're shooting off a bit of a message to Joe and a bit of a message to Sue. And we're having a little bit of what's called micro dialogue or micro coaching, but it adds immense value. So that was the sort of journey that we went on, and the reason for it. And yeah, there's been an incredible lot of learning, and it is amazing how having that sort of digital platform underpinning coaching can really make such a difference to the power, I guess, of the coaching relationship.
Yeah, I'm a fan of social media, and I don't care what people say, all this social media addiction. I'm a fan of it, and it's who I am, and it's a bit of I hate when people talk about social media addiction, and they're just stigmatizing it, and what have you. There's so much benefit to it. Cool. What's the name of the platform? Achiever,
ACHIIVA.
Great. So I think there's a definite scope for medical professionals, and was it you call it micro coaching? That's the one. Digital micro. Yeah, micro coaching. Great. I think we're coming towards the end of our very interesting talk. Thank you so much for spending your time with us, and I know you got so much more knowledge up there, but it's an opportunity for people to sort of open that door now and sort of walk through and embrace the dark side, or the management stroke business side of things. And we're more than happy to allow people to come into our world of touchy-feely, personal, patient, whatever you want to call it. I always ask this question at the end, and you've probably heard it, so I'm going to ask you now, what's the naughtiest thing you've ever done, Gabby?
I'm not sure that sharing the naughtiest thing I've ever done might be the right thing to do. But let's say it took place in a lift.
Super duper, absolutely excellent. I think you're the first person to actually answer that question. Everyone else has weaseled out of it. So yeah, you're definitely the first person who actually answered that question the best so far. We'll make sure we get it in the notes. Great. So how can people get hold of you, and what's the best way to sort of, if people are interested in coaching and business side of things and management and leadership and so many other things?
Probably just I've got a website, gabbybutton.com, GABBYBUTTON.com. So just jump on that, and my contact details will be there, and I'd be more than happy to chat to anyone.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We've covered a lot of ground today, and thank you everyone for listening towards the best part, which is at the end. And hope to speak to you soon, and may your spirits not be surgically removed. That's for sure. Bye-bye. Take care. Thanks for listening to this installment of the Surgical Spirit podcast. For all the latest in the world of surgical spirit, don't forget to follow on Twitter at The Third Eye Doc, and catch me on Facebook at the page The Third Eye Doctor. You can visit the website at www.thethirdeyedoctor.co.uk for more information on the work that I do. And please send us feedback and questions and suggestions for the podcast. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. I've been Dr. Haidar Al-Hakim, and I'll see you next time.